All right, everybody, if you can feel free to take some fruit and sweets and sandwiches back to your table if you like. Get more water, of course. Stay hydrated on days like today. See how insane and crazy the temperature is. It's only 38. That's not so bad. In Canada, on the weekend, it was minus 38 where I'm from. So a little bit of a difference. Now that you've had time to reflect on everything, are there any questions from the room that you would like to ask before we get into strategies? Straight back into things. I always say that the nice thing about events like this is that you are talking to local people who are not famous whatsoever, and we're not going to disappear on a book tour or leave the country anytime soon. So if you're reflective, like me, and you've thought of a question 2 days from now or 2 weeks from now, you can always shoot me an email. And if it's a question specifically to one of our wonderful panel members, I'll send it on to them. So let's get into the strategies. The first, not into strategies just yet, but I want these strategies, I want to reflect on several types of people that we may encounter or we'd like to support within sport and recreation. We will certainly be able to support people who have disclosed that they have a diagnosis of intellectual disability and autism. Maybe they only have a diagnosis of autism. Maybe they have autism, but they haven't told you about it. They've chosen not to disclose their diagnosis, which is 100% their choice, of course. Maybe they have autism, but they've never been diagnosed. And consider somebody who was referred for autism, went through every single appointment, but didn't get the diagnosis. Clearly, if you went through that referral pathway and you didn't get a diagnosis, there's something there. You probably need a little bit of support somewhere, but it wasn't enough. So under DSM-4, there used to be a catch-all bucket called PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, which means something's up, but we don't know what. Under the new DSM-5, we don't have that catch-all bucket. So these are the people that I'm going to try, and along with the panel, all of these strategies, we hope that we can support all of these people, whether they've disclosed a diagnosis or not. Whether someone should disclose a diagnosis of autism, cerebral palsy, it doesn't fuss me whatsoever. What I would like people to feel confident and to put their energy into is sharing if they have a diagnosis of any life-threatening allergies, if they have an EpiPen, if they have diabetes, and they might have a diabetic seizure. I had a friend who had a diabetic seizure, and it was one of the most scary times of my life, but because we knew he had diabetes, we knew what to do. If somebody has autism, I don't know if that helps me or not. If I know that they don't respond when their name is called, 100% that helps me. If I know that they get really startled when you blow the whistle, that will help me. But if you tell me that when they're looking at you and you hold up the whistle and they look at you, then you can blow it and they don't get freaked out because they're watching you and they can expect it, then that's really helpful. If they don't understand road rules, that is very important. If they wander or abscond and you're scared they're going to disappear from the footy field, again, that is something I need to know. If they have difficulty generalizing skills, and so if they have learned something at home, they've learned to bounce the basketball at home, but it's difficult for them at school, that's something I need to know. But again, if it's autism, I don't need to know that so much. I can certainly do my job knowing all of those other bits and not all the other terminology. So the very first strategy and the absolute most important strategy is the individual profile, or the more I think about this, is just knowing the person and knowing the individual. So know the person and not the label. This could be an actual physical profile that is written on. It could be a 1 or 2 page profile. And what I like to do in this is to challenge you and to demystify the strategies of autism, is that There is not a single strategy that we use for somebody with autism that we don't use ourselves. It is just the application and the volume or the presentation is a little bit different. So who here has an individual profile? Would you like to say what your individual profile is? Michelle.
Oh, no. Well, I was just, the reason I put my hand up was because I thought that, I mean, I would think that all of us do have a very specific...
We all have specifically for us, we have PDPs, professional development plans, that are physical, written pieces of paper, says what I'm good at, why I've been hired, and what I want to achieve in the 6 months and the 12 months. So, anyone else have individual profiles?
Wouldn't the resume be your individual?
100%. Your achievements, the things you're the most proud of, your strengths. Your CV is 100% an individual profile. Anyone on Tinder? Or Bumble? It's a good opportunity to see who else in the room is.
Yeah.
We'll have another break later. So, I say this because often I've worked with people who have said, but Shawn, an individual profile is really, it's belittling. It is childlike. And I say there are 6,000 people in the Department of Health and Human Services. Every single person should have an individual learning plan. It is interesting that not every child in school has an individual learning plan, but every single staff member in DHHS does. So I think that we should support children as well as we support ourselves as adults and how we support high-performance athletes. This might be something that is actually written down in a special development school. You might have an individual profile that goes from class to class to class and into PE. It can say what the child's likes are, what their interests are. For a substitute teacher, a resource teacher, CRT is the Aussie lingo. This is extremely important for that person. For a coach, possibly for Matt or for Sharon, it might not be a piece of paper, but it's something that's in their head that says this is what they're good at. We've divided up their foot into 3 different parts of numbers. It's 1, 2, 3. So when we say kick the ball, we're telling them where to kick the ball off, which part of their foot, inside, outside, toes, etc. So that is the individual profile. It is the most important part. Know the person, not the label. After that, we can be finished. We got a few more to go through. Before we get into finding common ground, I will hand over to Robin to talk about how you would start a session. And so if you do have the individual profile and you've learned a little bit about them, what would you then do to start the session, Robin?
So it's just a little bit.
Maybe
is it on?
Yeah.
I might just not speaking close enough to it. Can everyone hear me now? Perfect. So a little bit on the back of what Shawn said earlier about introducing a child to a classroom and using like the pictures or the colour codes to try and identify what they're currently feeling. Are they currently ready to learn? So a lot of schools use 2 main things, all based around feelings. So again, if you're going into a school, it's a really good idea to figure out what they already use, what systems that they already have in place in lessons, because kids will already know how to use that system. So hopefully they'll be able to identify straight away what they're feeling, and then you'll be able to put strategies into place of how to learn. So for example, a huge one at the minute amongst special and special developmental schools and even some mainstream is called the zones of regulation. So the zones of regulation uses 4 colours. It uses blue, green, amber and red. So if you're in the green zone, you're at your optimal learning zone. So you're ready to learn, you are happy and you're calm and you're ready to learn. Then if you're in amber, that's things like also getting, could be you are a bit sad, or you're getting a little bit annoyed, or even that you're actually just getting too excited. And then also, if you're then in red zone, that is when you're angry, and at red zone you need to actually be asking the child if they need a break or putting in other strategies to get them to come down. And then blue zone is if they are maybe sick or if they are tired. So zones of regulation is used by a lot of schools. If you don't have access to that, just being able to go feeling, so are you feeling sad, are you feeling happy, maybe you're tired, and linking with what the schools already do will give you a huge advantage because you're not starting at the beginning trying to get the child to do something new. They will already know about their feelings, and it's going to give you a really good idea of then how you progress that lesson. Do you need to give them 5 minutes chill time, or can you jump straight in? So just again, try and link with what the schools already use, but talking about feelings is a really good way to start the lesson and just actually know where that child is and are they actually ready to learn.
Thank you.
Just any questions on that one?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I get you to bring the microphone a little bit closer? No, closer to you.
Closer to me?
Yeah.
Is that better?
If you can speak right into it, I think the
Okay.
volume.
Do that one.
Yeah,
Is that
beautiful.
better?
Thank you.
And is there any questions just around zones, regulations or feelings and that start of the lesson? No? Okay.
Shawn, just on this one, just quickly,
Closer.
just to comment. I think when I went into your school to do some clinics, Robin did this really well. She told me about kids that maybe had a few issues, ones they might have to look out for. They might just sit down, not really participate. And I think the idea of an individual profile is fantastic. As Shawn said, I may not get a piece of paper saying with all the information, but more so Robin coming to tell me about individual kids really helped me plan the session. So I think that's a fantastic idea, even in an Auskick setting for new coordinators that may not know the kids. I think could be really beneficial.
And Matt, while you're speaking, how about any advice that you have for starting the session? Robin's talked about the emotional regulation, and then how would you actually get the kids started off?
To start a session, finding out about the kids and Robin getting them ready, as she spoke about, really helps. I think it's just really basic, as I would do in a mainstream school. So you just give them all footy, I find. So engage them straight away is one of my biggest things, and then just get them into it. So at Robin's school, I struggled a bit talking to them because they weren't all engaged at the same time. So I found you just start talking, just talk, and they will just come along. They'll see everyone else doing it, and they'll join in. So if you feel they're not all engaged or listening at the start, it doesn't mean that they're not. They might just follow their mates around.
Do you use any common ground, or do you find out things they're interested in, what their favorite players are, teams are?
There was when I went in, I was representing the Western Bulldogs, so that was a common ground there. They all liked the Dogs because it was in Sunshine, so that was their local team. I'm not sure what his name was, but there was one kid with
we don't probably say names.
with a Freddy Krueger shirt on, and that was just a common interest. I went up, saw that, started talking to him about it, and I just saw him become more comfortable, and then he participated in the session. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Sharon, do you have any advice on how you would start a session? Especially, I suppose what's really nice today is we're talking a lot about team sports. What would your advice be for starting off a session?
So I guess similar to Matt.
Yes.
I would, I think kids just gravitate when there are balls lying around. They immediately go and kick or throw it in the air. So that's a good way of getting them to where you want them to go. But prior to that, I would probably already have a game plan in my mind of where I want them to be. So if I'm inside on a basketball court, which colour line I will want them to line up on when I'm ready to start. Or if I'm outside, maybe using coloured cones so that I can kind of point, okay, everyone go to the red cones. So that area is kind of marked out, and using equipment like that a little bit more strategically so that when I explain something, they can kind of see the different colours and go to the right space.
And prepare lots of visual support in advance. Super. Any questions around what the panelists have been saying? Super. I snuck in the find common ground, and Matt gave the excellent Freddy Krueger example. So that already covers that. This next strategy, this is not that different, of course, to you and I. We join a new office, there's probably people that we automatically gravitate to, whether they are the footy fans and they're every single Thursday they're in the lunchroom doing the footy tips and they live for the footy tips. And then there's other people and all they talk about is lycra and cycling and hill climbs and how fast they did this and how fast they did that. And then there's park run people, they love talking about park run and all the park runs in the world. And so we do gravitate towards people who do have shared or similar interests. If you love travel, then maybe you want to hear about someone's experiences in another country, etc. So try to use someone's interest to your advantage. That same young boy who freaked out about the basketballs all being bounced, what he loved was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And so in the classroom, we had the lifelines that you could ask the audience, which was really fun. He had a phone a friend, and sometimes if he got upset, he would call his mom, just like anyone else probably would. And of course, he had the lifeline where he could cut the questions down in half. In your sport or rec endeavors, it's pretty reasonable to call a timeout. I would suspect that some people might even call a medical timeout when it's not needed and they just need a chill. Not saying that anybody actually does that, but it could happen. You could incorporate yellow or red cards, or as we heard from Robin, I think incorporating those color systems so that somebody could have the same color card to say, hey, I'm not feeling the best, I just need to chill out. Communication considerations. Again, this is this has come out because a lot of people say, oh, but if we use short and concise language, it's really belittling, isn't it? If we drop off the please and thank yous, isn't that really rude? And I say that it's the tone of our voice that creates whether something is friendly or rude. This isn't unique to people with autism. A lot of us, when you're managing teams, you'll encourage them to have SMART goals, or you need to set SMART goals. So SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Those are things that we use as adults all the time. So why wouldn't we use the exact same strategy for children and the same strategy for children or adults with intellectual disability or autism? When we are speaking, we want to stay calm, ensure you have their attention. Having their attention doesn't mean having their eye contact. It might mean that their body is turned to you. It could be that their head is down, but when you pause, they look up, and then you continue talking. Check in that they understand. If they are verbal, getting them to repeat what you've said, asking them why or how questions really checks in that they've understood. A lot of people will use PECs. PECs are a picture exchange communication system. We still use visual supports on a daily basis. You order a coffee, you get a number on your table because the visual support makes life easier. Why would the service staff want to walk around asking what number you are? You'd have to remember the number. It wouldn't be easy, so we use pictures to help us. We land in a new country, we're looking for the bathroom, we use pictures to help us. And so PECs are very commonplace.
Just on PECs, just for anyone that needs to actually know a resource that will help them, Boardmaker.
Yes.
So Boardmaker does, a lot of schools will use Boardmaker for visuals. Prolo Quote to Go, again, you can actually log into the online website and get visuals, but also that is an iPad, iPhone program that you can use to communicate to students that are either non-verbal or that have auditory processing. So yeah, Boardmaker, Prolo and Quote to Go are just two big ones used in schools that will help you communicate more with your non-verbal or those that struggle with auditory processing.
Robin, would you use, do you see any differences between, say, cartoonish type pictures that you might download from Boardmaker, or are there times when people probably prefer the actual photo or the real object as a photo?
And from my experience, it doesn't, and again I'm referring to the speech pathologist at my school, is that it doesn't necessarily matter which one you use as long as you use the same one consistently. So for example, if you're using some cartoons or some like Boardmaker or some Prolo quotes are again even more simple. And if you're trying to use a mixture, that can complicate things for the students. So whichever one you decide to go for, at my school is all Prolo Quote to Go. That's what we've got to use. So it's about consistency with the children that you're using them with. So I personally prefer simple ones, but again, other kids might prefer pictures, but just try and be consistent with the ones that you use.
Any questions about the visual supports? Working with a speech therapist, it's interesting, working with a speech therapist to develop pictures is really important. And speech therapists can help you with prosody of language and the pragmatics of language, all the social bits and pieces that are really difficult to see and understand. So pictures are a huge part of communication. On the board, one of the questions is how do we manage behavior, or how do we prevent behavior that we don't like? And the examples that Robin has given already around the zones of regulation is one way to prepare and adjust the environment. It's not that we don't really change the child, we don't change the person, we change the environment. And so that is one way that we want to ward off challenging behaviors. An individual who engages in challenging behavior probably doesn't do it on purpose, they don't want to do it. It's probably because we are not communicating with them as best as we can. And so I always say I'm never changing the child, I just change the environment. And so clear communication, using picture supports, even if somebody is verbal, sometimes picture supports are necessary. Keywords. Who here uses keywords in their life? Would you like to share an example? Stop. That's a good one. Every single morning I leave the house, I think phone, wallet, keys, and then I have to add security pass onto that. There's a fantastic Adam Sandler video and song about phone, wallet, keys, but it gets into a very inappropriate language and I won't be showing it today. So go search it on YouTube if you like. But so we as adults, I think we definitely use keywords. Ben, who's in our office, he's a mad keen golfer. He uses the keywords of soft hands. On top of the words of soft hands, he has a visual that he uses for golf as well, is that you imagine holding a bird in your hand. You want to hold the bird tight enough that it can't fly away, but not tight enough that you kill it and smother it. And so that's the soft hands that you want to apply to probably most racket sports when you're playing baseball, lacrosse, and golf, are those keywords. If you were to try and teach frog jumps to somebody, what are the keywords you might use? Anyone want to have a go? If somebody doesn't just know, do a frog jump.
Hop.
Hop? What if they don't know hop? So you might pair it with your own gross motor imitation, so you would do this hop, and you pair it with that. You might break it down into smaller pieces, and so before you actually hop, the very first thing you do is actually squat down, and then you bounce up. And so we might look at also what's called task analysis. So keywords that we use all the time for high performance athletes. There's an Olympic gold medalist who's on a podcast called Freakonomics, and she talks about the keywords and the behavior psychology that she used to win a gold medal. And it starts off on the balance beam routine, that it's shoulders back, hips forward, chin up. That is the way that she starts every single routine using those keywords. So if we use that for a high performance athlete who's a gold medalist, maybe we could use it for kids as well, using those keywords. So think about that if you're trying to teach maybe the warm-ups, the stretching, and the cool down especially. Matt?
Yeah, so in AFL, when we go out to schools, we use the pancake, ice cream, and scoop technique to handball. So we don't just say put the ball on the hand and hit it off. So we want to make it relative to them and what they may like. And there's one of your kids that is going around for the rest of the day saying ice cream to Robin.
Yeah, I actually missed the first week that Matt was in school because I was on a PD. And yeah, I came back into school and I had kids telling me ice cream. I had no idea what it had meant until I caught up with teachers that had worked with Matt. But I had kids coming back in telling me ice cream, and then the next week when I actually was able to join in the sessions, that's what they remembered was ice cream. And it worked, and you then saw them handballing just from that keyword.
Sharon, would you add anything into the keywords, either for yourself or the athletes you work with?
No.
It's It's hard to follow up ice cream pancake.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
like
that's a good one.
soccer, football is probably a little bit different from AFL, where we can't use our hands, and the motion is all based on your feet and your movement. One thing, not so much words, but visual support for us. Even just color coding the goals, the direction that they need to head. So putting a colored bib on one side of the goal so that you can say, red, we're kicking towards the red as opposed to kind of going towards the goals. So visual support like that kind of makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. To steal one from Kelly Tate, who's a mum and founder of AAA Ballarat. They support one young boy who's blind as well as who has autism. And for him, they've sort of, touch his foot and they say this, the front of your foot, your toes are number 1, the inside of your foot is a number 2, and the outside of your foot is number 3. And so when he needs to kick the ball, they'll shout 1, 2, or 3, and that's the part of the foot that he's kicking off. And he's pretty good, and they've got a video on the AAA Ballarat Facebook. You can watch it, it's really, really good. So that's the keywords. It's things that, even Muhammad Ali had his keywords that float like a butterfly. And so if it worked for him, maybe we try applying it for the people we support as well. Using those keywords, and I've spelled relaxation a little bit wrong, but we can translate that into mindfulness strategies. We can use those keywords and pair it with our hand signals of stop, or we can pair it with calm down. And so when the child is out on the field and really far away from you, they can't hear your words, but maybe they hear your hands and hear what you're doing when they see you. I've used the soft hands one, and even considering routine. There's no better example of routine than Rafael Nadal when he's going to serve. He goes through a very complex routine, and if somebody takes a coughs in the audience, he starts it over again. And so even if you're teaching someone golfing and putting, ideally you want them to go through that same routine. And looking back at the diagnosis of autism is that some people do have a high need for routine, so maybe this is a way of using that deficit for something good and having a good outlet for it. Is that even if it's not windy, you'd still pick up a little bit of grass and test the wind, just to keep that routine and just to keep going through there and relaxing the mind. Communication is it's a tricky one for all of us. Sometimes we communicate poorly with loved ones or with colleagues. And then in Australia, I think with the lingo, it can be challenging as well. And so some of these things are actually from people with autism and challenges or funny outcomes. And then others are from neurotypicals. And so bring a plate was actually one shared with me by a neurotypical person. She was from India, she was doing her English course in Melbourne. The class said, oh, we're having a party, everyone bring a plate. And so this person that's newly arrived to Melbourne goes to the party, nothing but a plate. And everyone else obviously has brought plates with food. Daniel told me an example this week of when people kept saying to him, break a leg, and he had no idea what in the world he was meant to do. Was he meant to break his own leg or someone else's leg? Why would you be wishing people this? I can't remember if it was Yvonne who's at the back of the room, or Vicky, I think it was Yvonne, who said to her students at Northern School for Autism, everyone pick up the tennis balls. They picked up the tennis balls and then dropped them again. And they're meant to pick up the tennis balls and put them in the bucket. Is that a communication problem from the kids or from Yvonne? And so I think it's a bit of both. And so we can be a little bit more clear and concise in the words that we use. I've learned through my mistakes, and now you can learn from my mistakes, is that one young boy I worked with in Canada once, something happened and he just went into this huge meltdown. He was crying, he was like hyperventilating to the point where he was sick. And when he calmed down, luckily he had just sort of increased his verbal communication skills, and when he calmed down, him and his mom and I were like, what happened? And he said, oh, you called me a smart cookie. And I was like, oh. And in the time I was thinking, is it the lights? Did I shout? Did I scare him? What has happened? And so when he calmed down, he said, you called me a smart cookie. And I was like, I don't know what's wrong with that. And he said, Dad loves cookies. I don't want Dad to eat me. And he started getting upset again. And so in that case, we were quite lucky because he could communicate and he could tell us what happened. But if you're working with someone that's nonverbal or someone who's verbal but can't communicate that they misunderstood, it is really challenging. And so sometimes people get upset and you just are not going to know why. That same boy, one morning, the same thing happened. He was super upset, hyperventilating. He calmed down. His mom said, "What happened?" What happened was, for the week before, the snow was melting, the grass was turning green. And his mom was saying, "Oh, you've got your new bicycle on the weekend, we're gonna go bike riding, it's gonna be really fun." And on Friday night it snowed, and the snow was covering all the green grass. And he said, "I slept through summer, Mom. I really love summer, I missed it." And she said, no, it just snowed. It's still summer, but it's Canada. So anything can happen. So he thought he slept for several months, and he missed summer. So, and then hit a jumper. My brother back home in Canada, he hit a jumper, and to us, hitting a jumper is a deer. But to my mate at Autism Victoria, he had this idea of a red sweater in the middle of the road, and my brother hit it and couldn't understand what was happening. So communication, don't avoid using idioms and alliterations or visual words. Just really consider who you're communicating with and what their preferred communication style is. And it was important that with that one young boy where we had lots of difficulty around that, we actually spent a lot of time teaching what it means when we say, "Oh, it's easy like a hot knife through butter." And so we could actually show that experiment. Or we could say, "It's like a piece of cake." And we just made it up like, it's as easy as cutting cake, right? It's easy, it's something that is easy to do. So don't avoid those things. It's important to implement that and teach them as you can. Any examples from the panel?
Yeah, I said once to someone, a ball was flat, and I was like, "Oh, that ball's dead." And I had a little girl burst into tears because again, she just heard the word dead and thought someone had died, being that very literal thinker, and she just burst into tears because I'd said the ball is dead.
And Matt, did you say something about dropping the footy on your kicking? My memories. Do you have one, Matt?
That was the one you said before about the numbers. So 1 might be on your shin, 2
Yeah.
on the shoelaces, and 3 on the toes.
Yeah.
That sort of brain memory thing. But I've had no experiences like Robin said, but that's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
I've never really considered
your
when I
language.
go to a school.
Cool. Self-talk. Or Sharon, did you have one?
No, there's
The question?
Yeah,
Yes.
we're doing some running, and then I asked the kids to pick up the pace, and I had 3 of them running around with the pace. So I explained to them again that running faster.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And there was a teacher I worked with where she said to the student, "Pull up your socks, mate." And he bent over and pulled up his socks. And so she's like, she understood it, but to other people, they might just think he's being a bit naughty, right? So pick up the pace. I'll add that into my stories. Thank you for that one. Demonstrate positive self-talk. And so again, for high-performance athletes, lots of you guys are from the sport industry. You guys know the benefit of this is that you look where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. Every day I ride a motorbike, and when you turn, you look through the corners. You don't get fixated on trees or things you want to avoid hitting. If you're a golfer, you think to yourself, aim for the fairway. You should not be thinking, don't hit the bunker, don't hit the bunker, don't hit the bunker. I'm going to miss this putt, I'm horrible. It's just not good self-talk. So you can actually demonstrate that self-talk by verbalizing it and being a little bit of an announcer when you're working with the athletes. We talked a little bit about coexisting conditions, and then I told you forget about the numbers. Just think about the child that you're working with or the people you're working with. And while that is important, it is also important to remember that coexisting conditions are very common. So in one study, 90% of parents said that their children had heightened sensory levels compared to other children. So this might not be a sensory, like a diagnosed sensory disorder, but it's a heightened sensory issue. So for one young boy I worked with, somehow he had this incredible hearing where he could hear his dad's truck coming like 5 minutes before I could hear it. And he wouldn't run to the door for every vehicle, he just ran to the door for his dad's truck. He knew the exact tone of his dad's vehicle. And so I couldn't imagine how good his hearing was and how that might impact him when he's at school. In a situation like a pool, when it's quite echoey, it's cold water or smelly water, the chlorine, or at a NIPRS program when there's sand and there's wind and there's shouting children, or in basketball where there's 25 basketballs all going to bounce at the exact same time. Just think about how that affects everything. So that's where I try to, you can't necessarily manipulate the environment where the sensory environment is going to be perfect, but what you can try to do is introduce things at home first, and then in the community, and then in PE class. Any comments about sensory considerations or any sensory challenges that you guys have experienced?
Sensory is huge in a special developmental school. All our kids actually have a sensory profile on their individual profile that they all have. Again, just maybe think about the equipment that you have. Some people can be quite tactile defensive on the hands, so that means they don't like certain things. Or some people might work better if they have got a textured ball because of like the sensory feeling that they get through their hands. So yeah, certainly those that with higher needs, everything for them usually comes down to like touch and feel, and that can be both ways, what they like or what they don't like. So maybe take a few varieties of different balls and textured balls with you, because if they're not enjoying one, they might actually perform a lot better with another one.
And Matt, in Auskick 2.0, you guys have different textures of balls.
So when I was Kid 2.0, I was introduced, they brought out spiky balls, just normal round ones. You obviously had your footies as well. Maybe Logan, did you want to talk a bit about this as well? About what we were talking about before?
Yeah, it was a little bit tough to get through, especially some of the older heads in footy. Obviously footy is a very unique sport to Australia, and one of the most unique parts about it is the ball. And so some of the older staff members weren't too keen on introducing round balls into football or spiky balls into football, because that's not what football is. But the new way of thinking is it doesn't really matter what shape, size, colour, ball the kids are kicking, as long as we've got them kicking a ball, it's all gross motor skill development, and it's all going to help them to become a better footballer into the future. So yeah, it took a little bit of work, and there were some that just flat out refused, but they might not be in their jobs for too much longer. So.
So I think what's really interesting is that in autism, there's been quite an interesting conversation around sensory difficulties, etc. It wasn't actually part of the diagnosis back in DSM-4, but the improvement of DSM-5 is that there is actually a sensory component. And if you are in a situation where you can have a sensory profile of a person, that is absolutely incredible. And I think everyone should be working with occupational therapists. I'm assuming it was an OT that developed
Yeah, we
it?
have 2 OTs in school, one in primary, one in secondary.
So working with an OT is, they're worth their weight in gold, and understanding a sensory profile, and that probably actually influences how they learn as well. And so I brought up the spiky balls and different textures as it is almost like because you're doing that for everybody in the whole class. And then if there is somebody who learns better through different sensory inputs, now they've got a spiky ball and it might just change their interests. At the tennis on Wednesday, one of the young boys that was waiting to go onto court, we had to wait for the athletes to warm up before the children from Northern School would go on. And he had a rubbery bracelet that he could just play and manipulate, and he could chew on it if he wanted to. And there are probably some people in the world that will say, oh, that's not evidence-based, I don't know if that's good or not. And I come at first, do no harm. If he did not have that bracelet, would there be harm? Would his anxiety go up? Would he be upset? By having that bracelet, are you introducing harm? Probably not. And so I really was impressed with the young boy's ability to sort of self-manage. You could see he was getting upset underneath the stands when we were waiting to go on to Rod Laver. It was warm, it was uncomfortable, but the kids did amazing, and that one young boy was playing with his bracelet, which was a sensory sort of toy for him. So, at the back of the room, there's a question.
Just in regards to stick sports or racket sports.
Yeah.
When it comes to the actual handle, because I mean, you may actually touch the ball, which we have a variety of different balls. But when it comes to, say, the stick, is there, say, like a different like tape or something that you could put around? Or
Yeah, so we have with some of ours at school things like Velcro. So both sides of the Velcro. So some kids will prefer the soft side, and others spiky side of Velcro. So, and again, you can buy different tapes like that. Velcro is one that we most commonly use. It's easily accessible. But again, we've got kids that are not so using for hockey, but in walkers, and so they'll hold their walkers if it's got the Velcro and stuff like that. So yeah, you can find different things that again will help kids hold the hockey stick.
Logan?
I might just add on that one of the main arguments that we got back was around maintaining the integrity of the sport, which is something that you will hear a lot. My counter argument is if the barrier for a child to participate is the shape or feel of the ball, and that stops them from participating full stop, then there is no sport. If we have no kids playing the sport, then there is no sport. So we don't have to worry about integrity because there's nothing there. So let's get these kids playing our sport, whatever that might be, with any ball that helps them to play, and let's work towards them using a football, or let's work towards finding a football that has the tactile feeling that works with them.
Even the smell as well.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Oh,
a synthetic ball versus a leather ball
Yeah.
as well. Like some of the kids in one of the junior clubs that I've got really struggled. They prefer the leather ball, but in the lower age groups they use synthetic because they like the smell.
Yeah,
Whereas synthetic is too strong.
definitely.
So yeah, if we have to use this ball and that's going to stop them playing sport, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Let's just get them playing and use any ball that fits.
So one of the questions that was nicely submitted in the registration was, what are the barriers? And Logan has just answered some of that, is that sometimes it's the stick or it's the ball, and we don't want to allow that to be a barrier. So one of the things I would do around racket sports is you can take very cheap sock tape or stick tape, and instead of wrapping it flat, you can twist it up so that you get a little bit of a lip to it, and then you wrap that around the handle, and then you flat wrap it so that you've got ridges that the fingers can feel, and it's not new, it's what we use on ice hockey sticks. But it could be something, or you might take I'm not gonna make any cricket jokes. You can take some sandpaper and you can rub it on the handle of the tennis racket and just scuff it up a little bit so there's a little bit more tactile feedback. Or you could look at, there's some really nice soft cycling grips as well that are quite cost effective. And Laura, was there a question? Yeah, let's take the question online, please.
So there's two people that are along the similar topic. So Lisa's just asked, we find it hard for the kids with autism that look at scores as their achievement in 10-pin bowling and get upset if they lose. We try to let them know that it's their individual score and not to worry about anyone else's. Do you have any suggestions to help us out with this? And Rhiannon's just added to that, we have a similar issue with tennis, though we play with teenagers, young adults, where some behaviours and fixations are very established.
Yeah. And would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm the Victorian coach of the Disability Tapping Bowling Organisation. So this is something we deal with on a regular basis. One of the things the strategy we use is not about what the score is, but have you made a friend? Have you learnt something new? What was good about your day?
Yeah.
So, you know, I manage from severe disability all the way through to people who have very minimal, might just have a physical disability. So I spend my entire time managing that and the behaviours around that. But my thing is, when I do have someone who is upset about the score, who cares? I don't care about your score. The one thing I care about is you have fun.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things we have is we've got bowlers who get very upset when they hit a gutter ball. And so rather than, and you were saying before about where they hit it, my thing is as long as you get the lane, I don't care what you hit.
So I think that winning and losing is hard. I still play sport occasionally, and there's adults who get way too competitive in social sport. So again, this isn't from outer space. It's something that we all deal with. And so a lot of preparation can go into winning and losing. It probably starts with playing checkers and things at home in a controlled environment where if somebody does lose, you don't want them throwing things at the TV, etc. Probably the preparation, again, we don't really change the person, we change the environment. And so when we know that we're about to play checkers, and today is the day that I'm gonna win, I'm not gonna let you win today, so we're gonna go through a social story beforehand. And maybe that social story is something we write, ideally we could write together, and we can say, we like to play checkers together, I like to play with my friends. We can have chats. I like to chat about cats. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You don't want to say the negative parts, like it's not okay to throw shoes at the TV. You don't want to like remind them that that's what they did last time. You want to just paint a positive picture of this is what you can do, and it's okay to be upset, actually. It's totally fine to be upset. Emotions are emotions. You don't want to suppress the emotions, but you do want to give them a better outlet, and so verbalizing that they are, oh gosh darn, I'm so upset. Or I think in the FIDA league as well, we're working with some pretty big, strong people who they get upset and they're very, very strong individuals. So we do want to support people that they have positive outlets around that winning and losing stuff. We're gonna keep going on to the next one, but I do like the conversation that is starting to happen. But winning and losing is, there's no easy answer to that. I think we've covered the sensory considerations and we've had the panel contribute to that nicely. The quick thing I'm going to say about offering breaks and creating a safe space is that in my adult life, I can pretty much control everything. I control the air conditioning in the car, the music, what I eat for lunch. If I don't want to be at my desk all the time, I can walk to the kitchen. I can fake I need a bathroom break. I don't even have to tell anyone and check in with anyone. But for kids, they don't have that same element of control. And for nonverbal children, it can be more challenging. Maybe you're driving and the sun is in their eyes. They just want their sunglasses, but they can't verbalize that. And so they end up getting a headache, and then from the headache, out comes some severe behaviors. And so something simple like thinking. We say that people with autism have trouble with theory of mind. And theory of mind is that ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. But I would say that most of the problems, especially around challenging behaviors, is because we haven't put ourselves in their shoes. And so we have what's called the double problem. There's a fancier word, but I call it the double problem of theory of mind, is that their theory of mind is challenged, and so is ours. If ours was perfect, they would never have problems. So clearly our theory of mind's not perfect. So sometimes you might want to offer a break. And instead of saying, hey mate, do you need a break? Because that's a question, and maybe they ignore you, maybe they don't. You just say, oh, hey, it looks like you've been working really hard. Let's sit down for 2 minutes, and let's just take a break. And making a statement instead of a question. So just think about the differences that you can make. Please.
So we have an inclusive coaching workshop that we offer to our football clubs, especially new clubs that want to start an all abilities program. And one thing we kind of talk about is being realistic about what you can achieve in the training. So a little different from the two next to me, like we don't run these programs in school, so it's after school on a weekend. So, it's important to keep in mind, the length of the training and the length of the drills, because you're not going to keep their attention for, 2 hours like you would at, mainstream training. So it's about being realistic. Okay, if this drill, we can only do it for 5 minutes, then, let's try and plan it to 5 minutes and give them a break. If the whole training session only goes for half an hour as opposed to the hour, then plan it for half an hour, because you'll get more out of being realistic about how long you can keep their attention for and keep them engaged, than to say fill up the whole hour because that's what you're obligated to do.
Perfect. And that's really nice, a personalized approach, I think. Creating a safe space, the thing I'll say about a safe space is the St. Kilda Football Club, with support with working with Deakin University in the All Play program. St. Kilda created a sensory marquee during their Saints Play program. And what they found was that at first, in the first 1 or 2 sessions, the kids would go to the marquee, but then once they were familiar and they knew they had a safe space to go chill out at, it was a bit of a safety net, but they never ended up using it afterwards because the kids knew it was there, they knew they could escape to it, but they never needed it in the end. Around safe spaces and things, I think we're in a really exciting time as we understand sensory rooms and other things better. And I'm really looking forward to the new Marvel Stadium will have a sensory room as well. The start and end of session, I covered this a little bit coincidentally before, is that we will try and start and finish an activity with very familiar, mastered activities, things that people are really familiar with. And so if you're doing a gymnastics program for young children and you're introducing these animal movements, maybe somebody really likes animals, so that's why I keep having these animal pics up there. You might teach frog jump and you might teach elephant stomps, or you might cut up these cards and you ensure that the ones that they're good at goes at the start and at the finish. And then the ones that they're learning, the ones that are more challenging, are embedded in the center, and that's when you increase your prompting and maybe if they're good at frog jumps, you say, do 3 frog jumps, and they do it independently. But if you're working on starfish jumps, that's the new thing you're doing together, then you do the gross motor movement with them, and you imitate with them. And then they get to crab crawl, and they're independent with that again, and so you'd say, do 5 crab crawls, and they would do that independently. I think professional athletes, we can borrow from high performance athletes again here, is the warm up is going to be very routine, and the cool down is going to be very routine, and then all the challenge goes in the middle. Would you guys have anything about starting sessions? We talked a little bit about starting sessions. What about ending sessions? Is there anything, do you end a session on a fun note, or give them a spray?
I end on choice time. So at the end, 5-10 minutes, the children always get choice time. It's a bit of a reward as well, like you've done the lesson, you get choice time. There's other skills that come out of choice time, them actually being able to choose a piece of equipment, go and select it, and can they then also engage with the piece of equipment? So mine always has choice time followed by a bit of a debrief. So again, I've created visuals. So as the children leave PE, did you have fun? And there'll be the 3 pictures, or depending again on the level of the kid. For example, did you have fun? Or maybe a sad face. And so just as they're leaving as well, again, that links then to the start of the sessions, and also can tell the staff, the ESs, maybe what level of where they're at for when they go to next. For example, if you've got parents and you know that they've said, they're sad at the end of your lesson, the parent then can also be able to take that knowledge away. How are they then going to deal with maybe a car journey home? Do they need to put into place? So I usually do feelings as well at the very end as they enter, and it also gives me an idea of whether they've actually enjoyed the session or not.
That's a really good example. At the back, please.
So as a parent, I've seen a lot of coaches do group things at the end of the lesson, and I really love that the idea that it's the child's choice, because my son would exit stage left if you said, right now we're all going to play a game together.
Yeah.
Whereas the skill-based individual, maybe 2 or 3 kids at the most joining in together in a skill-based activity, and then and then just individual skills and working one-on-one with the adult would be his just absolute dream. Yep, he'd be all over the coach.
Yeah.
The idea of a group activity at the end would be the scariest thing of having any lesson.
It's a great way, of seeing what that child is capable of, what they've learned and what they enjoy. So, for example, if they can interact with a couple, they might get some friends and play together, or they might choose to go off by themselves. They might choose a football. If you've been doing football, they might choose something else. So again, it's a great way for you to observe for 5 minutes and maybe pick up something that you might learn from that child's behaviour that you then can take. But also, as well, it might give that child just 5 minutes to calm down before going off onto whatever activity they're doing next.
Sharon, would you like to add?
Well, I guess what we do, so for football, commonly you end on a game just to kind of finish the session off, but sometimes depending on the skill level, we might finish on a penalty shootout, so everyone lines up and they get a chance to kick at the goal, and when you get it in, everyone cheers, and when that happens you see a lot of smiles, no matter how hard they kick, how soft they kick, as soon as it rolls in, people cheer, there's a big smile, and then they go to the back of the line and they keep rotating for the 5 minutes. It's a nice way to end.
Yeah. Matt, would you end with the tackling dummy, or what's the favorite thing to end with?
I really agree with these guys. usually we would end with, say, footy tennis, where there's only one ball. So what I see happens there is one kid has his kick, everyone's watching him. So that could be a little bit intimidating. So that's a really good point. Not always to play games and give free time. As we've done footy, for example, they may have loved handball more than kicking.
Yeah.
And they can go and do that. Whereas footy tennis may be only kicking.
Yeah. And I think what you were saying at the back about for your own child having that one-to-one time, whether that sometimes with a coach, but sometimes parents say, oh, there's, you know, a teenager who's in the club and my child just really gets along with that kid for some reason. And so having that one-to-one time, whether it's with a coach or a parent or maybe an older child or who can mentor. We talk a little bit about a buddy system in a second. But I think it's a really great opportunity to end on a high note, end on something that's positive and successful. If Daniel was here, he really loves basketball, so Daniel would talk about trying to end on a good shot, of course, and on a success. And I think it's also a great opportunity to recognize the work and the effort that people have put in, and maybe they missed a couple goals, but you can say, hey, you really worked hard. I saw that was really hard for you. You kept your cool. You lost the game, but you know you're really doing good. It was a good time, that one-to-one in the end. Yeah.
Shawn, I'd just like to say, don't underestimate the power of a quiet time before
Yeah.
they can go. Especially children with special needs, and even kids who don't have special needs.
Yeah.
We seem to have lost the value of silence
Yeah.
and reflection,
Yeah.
and then being ready to go to whatever the next thing is. Sometimes sending those kids back to the parents who've had a great time and super hyped up, and then they've got to get in the car and all that. You know, when sometimes it's even better for them to have calmed down, reflected, have a better idea, and then be talking to mum and dad or
Yeah.
whoever gently about what they've had. And I've rolled out a thing these last holidays and holiday programs, and I can't tell you how successful just having some silence at the
Yeah.
end. Not
It-
having the music, not having the rainfall, not having all of that, just having some really quiet and some structure in it where they're recognising how they're feeling, recognising what they've achieved, you know, and then moving on to the next thing because then they're ready for that.
Exactly. So I think part of that cool down routine could potentially be a little bit of mindfulness if you were really high tech. But it's the ability to maybe recognize, feel your heart, think about the sounds. Maybe you can hear 3 sounds and then try to block out that sound, go from 5 sounds to 4 sounds to 3 to absolute silence, and really bring people down. And that's not something, I think we should do that for everybody, for ourselves. So I did kickboxing, and quite often we'd do mindfulness at the end of the session and just really chill while we're doing our cool down. Lexi?
Similar to the importance of the quiet time, it's also I think quite good to take on from that and realise that you don't always learn by doing and just sitting and watching. You'll
Yeah.
also be learning, so you don't have to force every child to participate in every activity or make them do something. Some of them need to learn at a different pace, and so by having that option,
Yeah.
you can learn in a number of ways.
And I think that probably is very true, I think, of the St. Kilda Saints Play program and the tennis program, where there have been siblings that have come down, and the siblings just sat on the sidelines for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. And then week 5, they get involved, and then they don't want to stop. But that
And it's just
power of observing and
familiarise
yeah,
yourself more with what's
exactly.
expected and not have that
Yeah,
anxiety about it. And
100%. Does anyone want to add? Laura?
I've just got a contribution here from David, and he's just said that in archery we encourage our learners to do blind shooting by standing up close to the target, closing their eyes, and just feel the shot. We find that removing the sensory load is an effective warm-up and cool-down activity.
Yeah, if sounds like it's in a safe environment where they're standing really close, I'm assuming, or very safe arrows. And so, yeah, I think trying, and this is, I think, what Logan and Matt were saying, is that it's not always about the the purity of the sport, or the, you know, it must always be this ball, or it must always be doing. It can be watching, it can be quiet time, and there is different things for everybody. But again, I think we can see how that applies in our own lives as well. So thank you guys. I really like your contributions. It's good. I talked a little bit about task analysis and chaining, so we're not gonna stay on this. It's the idea of breaking down every task into much smaller tasks, and you're teaching those very minute tasks together. Buddy system. So I won't keep playing this who's on a buddy system game. Probably tired of it, but many of us have either a formal mentoring system at work sometimes, and some of us have informal. Many of us have our key sort of people that we go to as colleagues, and we go to certain people for advice and help and support because they're a little bit more knowledgeable. At some point in our life, maybe we start taking on that leadership for somebody else, and we start mentoring somebody else, and we pass on what we've learned to somebody. So for a buddy system within a school, or within a feeder club, or within an all abilities cricket team, a buddy system is one option that some people might consider. So you might pair somebody up with, Matt, were you saying this is something you guys have, where you see children who are more familiar with the Auskick process, and then they take on the leadership for the kids that are brand new?
Yeah, so I've seen it in mainstream schools where maybe a year 5 would have a prep. I don't know if you do that, Robin. The older kids sort of
I'll carry on.
look after the younger kids. That's really the only time I've seen it. But it can be definitely used in Auskick as well.
So just to follow on from what Matt says, an example, I have some classes that are extremely difficult to engage, very high sensory classes, and they're usually put together for academic reasons, which makes it quite difficult in PE. They struggle to engage, but then come to sports day, they've got all these other kids around them that are doing the races, but all of a sudden they've done everything that I've been trying to get them to do for 5 weeks. Just because they see other people actually, other children doing it. So it's not necessarily age-based, but also if they see someone that is doing it, they might join in a buddy system as well. It doesn't necessarily be age, it can be based on ability too.
Sharon?
For us, we run a all abilities league, so it's a social competition, and one of our divisions we allow either physical support or a buddy on the pitch with them. So we, firstly the game is modified, so 5-a-side or 7-a-side, and the pitch is smaller, the goals are smaller, but in this particular division, you can have either your carer, your family member, or you can have a walking frame, whatever you need, to be on the pitch with you, to encourage you. This has worked really well in our Geelong competition. So there's quite a few carers who are on the pitch encouraging them as they go.
So I think the buddy system, and if Daniel was here, Daniel is an ICANN mentor, and so he mentors many people. I think it's 100 or 200 people with autism per fortnight in schools. And so the ICANN network really is that's passing on strengths to other people to build their strengths and their confidence. And so if you want to know more about the ICANN network, definitely check out their website, check out their humans story, and learn more about their mentoring program and mentoring system. Reinforcement and motivation. There's definitely, sport can be absolutely bewildering, and sometimes I wonder why I like watching tennis when it's just 2 people hitting a ball back and forth over the net. But for some reason, we love it. And almost 1 million people go to the Australian Open, so there must be something fun about it. I think, what worse thing could you do in life than ride a bicycle around France when you could take a car with air conditioning? Formula One, which I really love, it bewilders me that we just watch cars drive around in circles, and culturally we think that is awesome. So if whatever, it's naturally reinforcing, I like it, there's social parts to it, but we should think about the reinforcement and motivation. And so there was a question that was submitted during the registration process about how can I get somebody to like sport? And I think for some people they're just not gonna like it. It's not for them. It might be something they enjoy later in life. But there can be a lot of other things like recreation, and there can be bushwalking, there can be maybe swimming. I know a lot of people who went through high performance pathways through gymnastics or ballet or swimming, and they worked so hard they lost their love of the sport that they really liked. In their 20s and 30s, it could be something that they avoid and they don't like seeing it. And then for other people, they find the love again. So for me, I don't think sport is the be-all, end-all whatsoever. I think it's just a vehicle that we can use as a tool to bring people together and to support inclusion. It's an incredible tool to support physical activity, but there are risks as well. Of course, in some sport, there's concussion risks and dangers, there's the injury risks and all of that. So we should think about how reinforcement applies and how naturally motivating it is for each individual person. When we think about reinforcement, there are ways that we can sort of encourage people, either verbally through our verbal praise or through other things like tokens. So everybody here is probably on some sort of a reinforcement system. I get paid tokens in the form of cash money. I exchange that cash money for things like mortgage payments and electricity bills and beer every now and then, or a nice meal. And so after today, I've worked my butt off this week, and it is a bit stressful doing a little bit of public speaking and organizing all of this. And so I will reward myself with an extra nice meal tonight, I think. So there is that built-in reinforcement that we gain. Verbal reinforcement is something that we should not underestimate. I have had a lot of people tell me that, oh, but it's very childish. If you watch the Formula One, there's no athlete in the world that gets sort of more verbal praise. So when Daniel Ricciardo was having engine issues during one race, his team engineer actually came on over the radio and was like, Daniel, you're doing a great job, mate. And it's that verbal praise that you're doing the good thing. Keep on going. We can get into some really high-tech behavior management things and reinforcement schedules, but I'll just introduce you to a couple really quick ones. Somebody did ask and say that they wanted more high-level sort of introduction to behavior analysis stuff, but for today, we've got to get through the foundations, and then in the future, we can do more behavior management things and reinforcement schedules. But we have immediate reinforcement, so you eat a cake, you immediately feel happy. It is the best feeling on earth. Eventually, though, you eat so much cake, it's no longer reinforcing. It is actually punishing. If somebody forced you to eat the whole cake, you'd feel so horrible. So you get to a point where even a good reinforcer reaches what we call satiation, where it's no longer a reinforcing item. So maybe you reached a point where you just don't need any more money. So you're not working for money, you're working for the value you're adding to the community. So even immediate reinforcers, a reinforcer is not always 100% of the time reinforcing. It fluctuates. Immediate token exchange. You do a starfish, I give you a sticker, and then you get 5 stickers. We're going to take a break, and we're going to play some Nintendo Switch, which I think is the new thing. You might put $1 into a Coke machine, and you immediately get it. There's delayed reinforcement. So we ate that piece of cake, or we ate the whole cake, and we go to the gym. Maybe there's some immediate reinforcement of going to the gym. I feel immediately my anxiety or my stress goes down, but I know long term I'm going to have better heart health, I'm going to have weight management, and all this other stuff. And then there's intermittent reinforcement. So it doesn't always pay out, but sometimes it does pay out. So I just use the example of a pokey machine, is that you put some money in, you put effort in, sometimes there's a payout, sometimes it's not. Intermittent reinforcement is a way of creating extremely strong behavior. You can use it for good, and you can use it for bad. So just remember that. Ensure the reinforcement is contingent and specific. So instead of saying good job, you could say, oh, your arms are really straight, when they're doing that starfish warm-up stretching routine. Consider high-performance athletes. There's a lot around athlete contracts, and when they're in really long contracts, their performance dips, and then in their contract renewal year, their performance escalates again, and they perform at their best. Sharon, I know that you've got quite a strong knowledge in psychology and behavior stuff. Would you add anything into that? Surprise!
Yeah, so I guess I agree. Intermittent reinforcement, so, and kind of changing it up, so not always just saying good work, good job. Sometimes it might be a high five, sometimes it might be a pep talk, just kind of different levels of reinforcement. I guess in my mind, if someone always tells me good work, good work, good work, it just becomes like the effect of it is probably lessened. Whereas if you use some different vocabulary in there or different gestures, you might see a different result.
My daughter, good girl, is actually a trigger for her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so she'll go the opposite way to what you're trying to achieve. So that's been a big thing in school, is that especially when she was a bit younger, where they go, good girl, and she flip out.
Michelle's kindly going to walk around and make sure everyone has an evaluation form to fill in. And so if you don't have an evaluation form, please put up your hand as Michelle walks by. But back to the good girl as a trigger, that's really interesting and very important to know. And especially that's something where either in the actual written individual profile or in a verbal exchange, when you're dropping your daughter off to an Auskick program or other, to ballet or whatever she likes, kickboxing maybe, karate, that everyone knows good girl is a bit of a trigger. So that's a very important one to know. So for anyone who Michelle is giving the evaluation to, I think it's probably different to most evaluations you've ever seen, where you just circle some numbers and you probably don't think about it and whatever. But this is an evaluation. What I try to achieve is something that will actually change my behavior going forward. It will actually change the content that we put into the online module that we will develop with Special Olympics and multiple partners. So this is very important that this will influence the content going forward, and it'll influence the next people that we speak to, hopefully get a better product because of the feedback that you have kindly given. So do think about it. We will wrap up soon and you'll have a couple minutes to write in there. The 10-to-1 rule. So I think this is what, we do say that good coaches are good coaches. There are potentially, coaches that they would probably never need an inclusion module. They would never need to go to an inclusion workshop because they just really naturally get it. They know that to motivate people, you use lots of positive, but at the same time, you're quite honest and you say, look, mate, you're really good at this, but if you just get 2% better, 5% better, you're gonna be exponentially improve. And so this is what we do around whether it's language or behavior, especially trying to catch someone being good. And so some people will say there's a 4-to-1 ratio, 8-to-1 ratio, 12-to-1. I don't know, I just chose 10-to-1 because that seems like a nice balance. You try your best, going back to reinforcement, is that you can't always ignore bad behavior. Well, no, you can't. If someone is standing on the table and it's dangerous, they're gonna fall off. You might have to go over and give them attention. You have to maybe deep pressure squeeze them so they're safe as you pull them off the table. And somebody will say, oh, you're giving them reinforcement because you've stopped what you're doing the dishes or you're tidying up. You've given that child attention beyond just the visual attention you've given them. Now you've squeezed them on their shoulders, you know they like that, and you put them down. But what you try to do is minimize the reinforcement. And then you try to give them more attention and more of that deep pressure squeeze for times that they're being appropriate. So if they're sitting at the table and they're doing coloring in or they're playing checkers, you might walk over. If they like deep pressure, you just walk over and squeeze their shoulders and go, oh, you're doing an incredible job, you're playing nicely. Not who's winning the checkers. We don't focus on winning and losing, but who is, are you having a good time? What are you talking about, etc. Around the winning and losing, I meant to say that a lot more sports now are not keeping score. So I believe tennis possibly, and football. Auskick hasn't kept score for some time now, but that was just something that jumped in my head recently. So there's different kinds of reinforcement. Reinforcing other behavior, reinforcing incompatible behavior. So if someone's picking their nose, trying to reinforce good behavior with their hands, but then potentially, I don't know, is it okay to pick your nose? Depends on the situation. So go to the bathroom, use a tissue, do it when no one's looking, etc., etc. So it's not necessarily about getting rid of a behavior, it's about letting them know when a behavior is okay and when it's not okay. A lot of behavior is really difficult, is that You go to a urinal and there's 5 urinals, and there's one man at the left urinal. It'd be weird to go stand right next to him. And so you're not going to teach that behavior to always go there. But if there's no other space, then you do go stand there. So our behavior fluctuates based on the environmental changes. And so you can't just reinforce things with hard and fast rules. You have to think about the environment too. That's more differential reinforcement. So even if someone, they're not jumping the bar where you set it at, but they are putting in an incredible amount of energy and effort, and they're really trying, and they're keeping their calm and their cool, and that's the best they've ever done, and that gets the party and the 2 high fives and all of that. Maybe your goal is not that they necessarily jump the bar perfectly, but they keep their calm and cool, and that they practice perseverance. Talked about satiation, reinforcement schedules, we talked about that. Shaping a behavior, and so if somebody is kicking a ball and you want them to kick it, the first goal is that they just kick it or that they first touch it, but you want to shape that towards where they're actually kicking the ball with control on the inside of their foot to make a pass. You're not going to expect that on the very first day and only reinforce the perfect pass on the first day. You're going to reinforce them just touching the ball, playing with the ball, going up to it, kicking it off the front of their toes. If they kick it off their the outside of their foot or with their heel accidentally, totally fine. That gets lots of reinforcement because it's the first time they're doing it and it's the best they've ever done so far. But as they achieve more and as they get better, you start to limit the reinforcement for the effort, and you start increasing the reinforcement as the behavior gets closer to what you desire. That's the shaping of a behavior. Catch them being good. This is Dr. Anthea Rhodes from the Royal Children's Hospital. So basically, I've said lots around catch them being good, reinforce for positive behaviors. But if you don't believe me, Dr. Anthea Rhodes says the same thing. So she's pretty smart. Positive behavior support. We just get into this a tiny little bit, just enough to say that positive behavior support is like a week-long workshop if you want to really understand it. So the topography of the behavior is actually exactly what it looks like. So you think about topography of a map, this is the topography of a behavior. Explain it exactly. He punched me, he pinched me. That doesn't explain a lot. You have to say that they hit you with an open hand, or they were going away from you and they hit you in the stomach or in the shoulder. Try to explain what happened before. So we talk about the ABCs. The antecedent, we were going to the mall and it was a lot busier than usual, the behavior. They took off their clothes and the consequence was you left the mall. And so what that person learns is, I get upset, take off my clothes, we go home. And so there's a really nice video on autism spectrum on aspect on positive behavior supports that if there's time at the end, we'll watch, but I can send you videos anytime. Consider the real goal, and so if you are trying to teach somebody to swim, is the goal that they do a perfect butterfly stroke? Do they have to breathe perfectly when they are doing freestyle? Or is your goal that they just swim and tread water for 3 minutes in any kind of fashion? If you are working with a high performance athlete and they must always touch the end of the pool with 2 hands, then yeah, that's your goal, is that they have that perfect, the perfection within that. But if you're working on somebody with water safety, then your goal is completely different. Haven't heard from the panel because I think I'm trying to speed up, but would you guys like to add something into what you consider the real goal when you're working, whether it's having fun or winning and losing, perseverance?
Yeah, I'll just link that to the winning and losing question we had earlier. For me, again, your learning intention, what are you actually trying to achieve? You need to differentiate per the child, and certainly my learning intentions are never around whether they've won or lost, whether they've knocked down 10 bowling pins or 2. So again, what are you trying to achieve? Is that just that they release the ball, that they hit 1 pin, or they even just had the ball going forwards instead of backwards? So again, just be, like Shawn said, what is your actual goal? And think about that also when it comes to the winning and losing as well.
Thank Thank you, Robin. Familiarity. Once again, high-performance athletes, they just don't rock up to a golf course and compete in the tournament on day one. They might walk the course by themselves without clubs is the first thing they do. Formula One athlete probably practices for every hour that they're actually racing. They're probably in the simulator playing games electronically, practicing the course for a lot more hours than they actually race. So that familiarity is that if we want somebody to learn, I keep going back to the basketball example because I think that's where I made some of the biggest mistakes and it came out as the biggest learning, is that we wanted to increase familiarity with basketball at home, introduce it there, make it lots of fun. There are some hard parts about basketball is that it is noisy. If you have sensory sensitivities, it is really challenging. The hand-eye coordination is very challenging. You're running around, you're trying to bounce the ball, you're hitting your foot somehow, you're kicking the ball. There's other kids running around and there's balls going everywhere, so it's a challenging one. So trying your best to try and get into the gym maybe in a smaller class or into just a one-on-one situation to introduce it from home into the school or into the community. Is that realistic for you guys in the on the panel? Is it realistic for something to be introduced at home and then into your community-based or school-based sports, do you reckon?
Depends, I guess, a little bit on your socioeconomic environment. For myself, in Sunshine, it's very difficult to get parental involvement for cultural reasons, language reasons, economic reasons. So it's difficult for me to start that process at home. But I do work with the teachers to get them to look at skills in the classroom before coming to PE, and so the process sometimes starts with the classroom and then into my actual PE lesson.
And I think going back to the barriers question that someone submitted, one of the biggest barriers is time, and so it could be a parent that's working their butt off and they're doing the absolute best, but it's a single parent home. There's very little disposable income, so to buy a $30 or $40 basketball is not even in the question. So borrowing possibly from the Auskick Center might be possible, or from the footy club. We have equipment and sport club grants as well. So if there is socioeconomic challenges and that's a barrier, we want to overcome that.
Yeah, it's a bit tough in some situations because the parents might not have any interest in AFL, or that might not be a sport that they've ever watched. So the first time the kids get introduced are at school, so it is a bit tough to introduce it before AFL Victoria or soccer going to the school.
Sharon?
One thing we try to do, I don't think it's working anymore.
Is it close enough, or steel mats maybe? Maybe yours die.
I'll just talk loud. One thing we try to do for our All Abilities League, so we understand, this is out of school program, and so what we try to do is we structure our league in a way that allows them to become familiar to say Saturday mornings, that's for sport, that's for soccer. So instead of, so a lot of clubs, they train on weeknights and then they play on the weekend. What we do is we structure our games bi-weekly, so that 1 week it's training, 1 week it's game, 1 week it's training, 1 week it's game. So that, the time commitment from the family, firstly, it's not as much as you would normally if you're joining a club. But secondly, you get into the routine that on Saturday mornings, we're going to soccer, whether it be training, whether it be a match, you kind of just block out that time. So, I guess trying to structure our programs in a way that helps the families get into a nice routine that doesn't take up too much of our time. Similarly, like with our wheelchair competition, I ask them each year, I'm like, what do you want to improve on? What do you want to change? And they're like, don't change anything, because if we change anything, people aren't going to come back. So we keep the same location, we keep the same time, we keep the same referees, just so people are familiar with the people that they have to interact with, and yeah.
On that,
Yeah,
please.
please.
And the great thing about that is the fixtures are all at one venue.
Yeah.
So you might have 8 teams playing there, and the great thing about that is they all socialise together, all mix up, make friends, which is a big plus.
And that takes us back to one of the first questions that came online, is around what's the well-being or the quality of life outcomes, is that it's not necessarily what happens on the field, it's what happens on the sidelines and afterwards, exactly what you're saying. So this slide, we've already covered off comments and versus questions. Sometimes comments are just easier, questions are actually a demand and you're expecting something in advance. I've said positive self-talk and becoming a commentator. And then the very last thing, which is another probably a 2-day long workshop, is the value of social stories. So social stories were created by Carol Gray, and it's in part to convey, you can have really, really simple one-page social stories. We use them verbally all the time. We say, oh, you know, you're going to that party, what do you think you'll wear? And you start to convey expectations, what someone else is doing, what a potential social norm. Oh, I'm thinking about changing my hair. What do you think about this new hairdo? I haven't had that problem for a long time. But it is something that we use social stories in a verbal context. What we're doing for some people who are more visual learners who communicate visually is we're putting it into either photos or pictures that we've used from Perloco to Go or from Boardmaker, or for some children you might give them a disposable camera. They go around and they take photos of their football club, and they take the photo of the change room and of the field, and you can then get those printed off and create your own social story with them. So I will leave you with the very last strategy, is to say that social stories are incredible, but it is probably another full day, if not 2-day workshop. I would like to say that Laura is fantastic and has very kindly supported us with the live streaming. Laura, in her spare time, also keeps up to date the AAA Play website, which has gone statewide, and I think like everything, you know, we're constantly just working on the next version, making everything better. So if you are looking for programs, and that was one of the questions that was submitted, was how do I find inclusive programs? So go onto the AAA Play website. If you can't find something, shoot me an email, and Laura and I will chat. We'll chat with the sports. We manage over 100 state sporting associations. 50 of them have AAA programs, and this year we are reviewing how that funding goes. So from July 1 onwards will be, you know, our opportunity to make it better as well. Of course, another question was they wanted to know resources. So where to from here? We're at a really exciting time, I think, and I said this to Jonathan Coyne from St. Kilda, is that there are incredible people around us, and I think especially in Victoria, we do have an incredible group of people who have fought and advocated for inclusion in the community as well as in sport. In this room, there are some incredibly knowledgeable people at the panel, as well as out there amongst all of you who have been fighting this inclusion battle for a long time. I won't ask Rosa how long she's been advocating for her daughter for, but it's,
I'm over 70.
But it's, and your daughter's 50?
Coming up 42.
Yeah, so you've been laying that foundation for us, and so the new generation, like the three up here, I can't say I'm as young as them, so it's good. There are some good people. And then around Victoria, we definitely have AAA Play that you want to go to. I skimmed over autism, but if you want to know everything there is to know about autism, there's a free online course from University of California at Davis. All Play, which Logan is involved in, I was involved in, I did my master's with them. It's an incredible program, really trying to look at building an evidence base around sport, around football, dance, and there's also an Aboriginal component as well. Acing Autism is a fantastic program started by Richard Sperling and Shefali Jesti in the US. But of course, we've also got Advantage Autism. I thought Acing Autism was a good word, was a good name, but then there's Advantage Autism as well. And Yvonne, I can't remember if that's yours or Vicky's.
That's Vicky's.
That's Vicky's. And yours is Top Seed Tennis.
Let's Ace Autism.
Let's Ace Autism. Yeah, it's good. It's good. So tennis is a really cool sport, I think. What we've tried to achieve with our own autism-specific sports, I forgot to tell you, is that we see swimming and aquatics and gymnastics as building a really strong foundation for fundamental movement skills, and then we can start to introduce ball sports, racket sports, lacrosse, and maybe one day we get to the crazy sport of water polo, where you're trying to score goals and drown people at the same time. L's for autism golf. So if you like golf and you know who Ernie Els is, my gosh, these guys are doing incredible work, and they are delivering university level programs and training and placements in Florida. They are doing an incredible job. Heaps of online learning resources for free that anyone can go there. And I encourage everyone to watch their modules, because you can apply what they're doing in golf in any other sport. Autism Swim, started by Erica and Sydney. Tasmania, I just learned about this one. Lend a hand to Hugo. They've been actually featured on AFL 360 twice. They're doing some incredible stuff. And South Australia, Sports United Co. are also doing some cool things. So we're in some really good company in this year of 2019. I am extremely excited to see what we can accomplish together. I would like to send it out for questions before we wrap up. If there's no questions, then your evaluation should all be 10s if I answered all your questions. Laura?
This is a me comment, not an online one. AAA Vic has a resources tab that currently has the Autism Inclusion in Sport and Recreation Facebook Live video and PowerPoint slides there now.
Cool.
If people want.
That's where you can get today's PowerPoint, but I'm also happy to email them to you, and we will keep building that website with more resources. I thought I put in like .com instead of .org or something. I thought it was got time for a question or two, but I'll hang around while we. Rosa, please, Rosa.
When you were talking about communication and then changing the environment, and I remember organising a guest speaker from sailing who represented Australia, and the comment that I always remember was, we cannot change the wind, but we can adjust the sails.
Yeah.
And that was everything that we're doing is modifying, whether it's equipment or the environment or programs. It's about facilitating the individual to fit in to what's there.
I think that is the most beautiful note to end on.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get better than that. So, Rosa, I 100% agree with you that we can't change the wind, but we can change how we flow with it. So,
this is fantastic, but I just wonder whether the state budget or the federal budget ever gets down to this level, so that we can actually implement all this. I remember when my daughter Jacinta was integrated into secondary school in the eastern suburbs, and then they cut the teachers' aid funding, and even for a teacher to walk around in the schoolyard at lunchtime, and she became very vulnerable, and I had to withdraw her from that secondary school to a special school. So thanks, Jeff, wherever you are. And that really had a significant impact on us.
So,
and even her, because she had been in mainstream the whole time.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about all these inclusion policies, and this session today has been really terrific, again, I'll say it, but how can